Shadows move between ancient oaks under a moonless sky. This is the hidden world of the Druids, the most powerful and mysterious intellectuals of the ancient Celtic realms. For centuries, they have been trapped between legend and propaganda, their true story deliberately erased by the empire that conquered them. We are going on a historical detective mission to find them. By the end, you'll possess a clear understanding of who the Druids really were, stripping away 2,000 years of myth and mystery. We will examine why they left no written records and what Roman accounts are hiding. We will explore whether they practiced human sacrifice or were victims of a brutal smear campaign. This is the story of a lost intellectual tradition, a spiritual connection to nature so profound it defied an empire, and a legacy that whispers to us from sacred groves and buried artifacts. What do you believe is the greatest secret they took with them? To truly find them, we must first define them. The word Druid itself is a clue, a key to their identity. It is believed to come from two ancient Celtic words. The first is Dru, meaning oak, that mighty, long-lived tree sacred across the ancient world. The second is Wid, meaning to see or to know. A Druid, then, was literally an oak knower, one who possesses the deep-rooted wisdom of the sacred grove. This was not merely a title for a priest. It was the designation for the supreme intellectual class of Celtic society. Imagine a single person who served as the community's judge, settling complex legal disputes. They were the historian, memorizing the genealogies of kings and the epic tales of the tribe for generations. They were the poet whose words could bless or satirize with terrifying power. They were the astronomer, reading the movements of the stars to mark the sacred festivals of Samhain and Beltane. And crucially, they were the chief political advisor, standing at the right hand of kings. Their counsel sought before any major decision, from harvest to war. This fusion of spiritual, legal, and political authority made them the central pillars of their world, the keepers of all order, natural and social. Their realm was vast, yet culturally connected. We find them not in one kingdom, but across the Celtic tribes of continental Europe, in the land the Romans called Gaul, which is modern France and beyond. They were in Britain, and their tradition survived longest and most purely in Ireland, untouched by Roman legions. Their golden age spans from roughly the 4th century before the Common Era to the 1st century of the Common Era, a period when Celtic culture flourished across Europe. Even after the Roman conquest of Gaul and Britain, the flame of Druidic knowledge was carefully tended in Ireland for centuries more. This geographical and temporal spread shows we are not looking for a single, secret cult, but a widespread and sophisticated professional class. And this brings us to the core of the mystery, the reason their history is so profoundly hidden. The Druids themselves forbade writing down their sacred knowledge. Their vast learning, their laws, their poetry, their star lore, all of it was preserved in a living library of memory, passed from teacher to student through years, even decades of oral training. They believed writing weakened memory and, more importantly, profaned secret wisdom by making it common. So when we search for their own voice, we find only silence. They are a shadow on the wall of history cast by the light of others. We must piece together their reality from two flickering sources, the often hostile accounts of their enemies and the later mythologized stories written down centuries after their practice had faded. The question then becomes stark. If we cannot hear them speak for themselves, can we trust the words of those who sought to erase them? What did the Roman Empire, in its relentless campaign of conquest, have to say about the oak knowers who stood in its way? Our search for the Druids leads us to Rome, to the desks of three men who never met one, yet whose words would shape their legacy for 2 millennia. Our first and most influential witness is Julius Caesar. In his famous commentary, The Gallic Wars, written to glorify his own conquest of Gaul, he provides our most detailed portrait. Caesar describes the Druids as a class of immense authority, studying for up to 20 years to memorize a vast body of knowledge. He notes they presided over public and private sacrifices, a crucial detail we will return to. He confirms they were the judges in all disputes, and that their rulings were so powerful that anyone who defied them was cut off from society, a punishment feared more than death. His account paints a picture of a sophisticated, parallel intellectual system, one that commanded absolute respect. But Caesar was not an anthropologist, he was a general writing propaganda. His description, while valuable, serves a clear purpose: to explain to the Roman Senate why these powerful leaders must be broken to control the Celtic tribes. Decades later, the naturalist Pliny the Elder offers a more mystical and far more sensational snapshot. He describes a ritual where a white-robed druid climbs a sacred oak tree, cuts a rare growth of mistletoe with a golden sickle, and catches it in a white cloth before it touches the ground, all as a sacrifice to the gods. This single, vivid image has become iconic, defining the Druid in popular imagination as a nature priest. Yet Pliny, writing from a distance, frames this entire practice within a discussion of magic and superstition, implicitly contrasting Roman rationality with Celtic primitive belief. Finally, the historian Tacitus gives us a chilling scene from the Roman conquest of the island of Mona, modern Anglesey, the last Druidic stronghold in Britain. He describes the Roman army facing a terrifying opposing force on the shore, not of soldiers, but of black-robed druidesses screaming curses, with armed warriors and druids raising their hands to heaven. The Romans, shaken, eventually massacre everyone and destroy the sacred groves. Tacitus, often critical of his own empire, uses this scene to highlight Roman brutality, yet his description also permanently links the Druids with fanatical, wild resistance. So what do we truly have in these accounts? We have a contradictory portrait crafted by the conqueror. The Druids are simultaneously noble philosophers studying for decades and barbaric priests dabbling in dark magic. They are wise judges and screaming fanatics. This duality is not an accident, it is the classic propaganda of empire. To justify the eradication of a competing center of power, you must first dehumanize it. You magnify its foreignness, you highlight its most shocking practices, real or imagined, and you frame your own violence as a civilizing mission. The Romans needed to destroy the Druids not just because they led armies, but because they held the cultural memory and spiritual identity of the Celtic people. Eliminate the oak knowers and you cut the roots of resistance, so we are left with a puzzle. These classical texts are our only detailed written sources, but they are stained with bias and political motive. Can we find a whisper of the Druids' own truth buried within the Roman lies? Is there any physical evidence, any artifact from the ground itself, that can speak where these texts fall silent? This profound silence in the written record is mirrored by an equally haunting quiet in the earth. If the Druids were so powerful, so central to their world, where are their grand temples, their libraries, their monuments? We search the archaeological record for a label that says Druid, and we find none. This is one of the greatest puzzles in the search for them. The answer lies not in a failure of archaeology, but in a fundamental misunderstanding of their sacred geography. The Druids did not worship in temples built by human hands of stone and mortar. Their cathedrals were living, breathing spaces crafted by nature itself. The sacred grove, or nemeton, was their true sanctuary. These were forests of ancient oak, ash, and yew, encircled and protected by law, where the veil between the earthly and the divine was believed to be at its thinnest. Here, under a canopy of leaves, rituals were performed, knowledge was passed down, and judgments were given, but a grove leaves no foundation stones. It offers only pollen samples and subtle soil disturbances to the modern excavator. Their altars were natural springs bubbling up from the underworld, and the still, dark surfaces of lakes seen as portals to other realms. Their high places were the wind-swept hilltops closer to the sky gods. This entire spiritual framework was built from perishable materials, wood, cloth, offerings of food, flowers, and woven baskets, all of which returned to the earth within a generation. Then came the Roman campaign of cultural erasure. Tacitus's account of the massacre on Mona and the destruction of its groves was not an isolated event. It was policy. The Romans understood that to break a people's spirit, you must destroy their sacred heart. They systematically cut down the sacred groves across Gaul and Britain, not just as a tactical act, but as a profound symbolic victory, demonstrating that their gods and their order had triumphed over the old ways. So between natural decay and deliberate annihilation, the most obvious physical traces of Druidic practice were utterly erased. But the earth still holds whispers if we know how to listen. Archaeologists find curious deposits that defy simple explanation. Deep, narrow pits filled with the carefully placed bones of animals, often pigs or dogs, sometimes arranged in patterns. These are not trash heaps, they are ritual shafts, offerings to the chthonic gods of the underworld. Then there are the watery hordes. Across Europe, but especially in Britain, rivers, lakes, and bogs have yielded treasures of unmatched craftsmanship. The stunning Battersea Shield, a masterpiece of Celtic bronze and enamel, was not lost in the River Thames. It was placed there deliberately, a votive gift to the water spirits. Swords, cauldrons, and torques of gold have been found in similar contexts, often ritually bent or broken, signifying their sacrifice. These are not displays of wealth for the living, they are communications with the divine. One of the most compelling sights is the sanctuary at Gurney-sur-Aronde in northern France. Here, over centuries, warriors brought the weapons of their defeated enemies, not as trophies but as offerings. Thousands of swords, spears, and shields were ritually destroyed, then placed in a ditch surrounding a central wooden structure. Animal sacrifices, primarily cattle, were part of the same practice. This site presents a powerful archaeological echo of the practices Roman writers described: the votive deposits, the animal sacrifice, all centered on a natural, wooded space. No sign at Gurney says Druids were here, but the ritual grammar of the place aligns perfectly with the world they presided over. So the evidence is not absent, it is simply coded differently. We must look for the patterns in the pits and the treasures in the torrent, and read the landscape itself as their forgotten text. This leads us to the most controversial charge of all, the dark stain on their reputation that the Romans emphasized above all else. The accusation that forces us to ask, were these oak knowers also practitioners of the ultimate taboo? The most chilling accusation leveled by Rome was that of human sacrifice. Julius Caesar states it plainly, describing wicker figures filled with living men set alight as offerings to the gods. Other Roman authors describe divination by reading the death throes of a stabbed prisoner. This testimony formed the core of the justification for the Druids' eradication. Rome presented itself as the bringer of civilization, stamping out barbaric practices. But is this the full story, or is it the ultimate piece of conquerors' propaganda? We must approach this with clear eyes. The archaeological record from Celtic Europe does contain evidence of violent death that suggests ritual killing. The famous Lindo man, discovered in an English bog, was a young man who suffered a triple death: a blow to the head, strangulation with a garrote, and a cut throat, before being placed in the waters around 2,000 years ago. The careful, ritualized nature of his death points to a sacrificial act. Other bog bodies show similar patterns, yet context is everything. Human sacrifice in times of extreme crisis was not unknown in the ancient world, even in Rome's own legendary founding myths. For the Celts, in a world view where the spirit world demanded balance, the ultimate offering, a human life, may have been reserved for moments of existential threat like famine, plague, or impending invasion, to restore harmony with the gods. The critical question is whether this was a central, frequent feature of Druidic practice as the Romans claimed, or a rare, terrifying last resort magnified by their enemies for political effect. The Romans themselves were masters of spectacular state violence, from the crucifixions along their roads to the gladiatorial games, which were, in essence, ritualized human sacrifice for public entertainment. Their outrage, therefore, rings somewhat hollow. It seems likely the practice existed but was exaggerated into a monstrous caricature to dehumanize the Celtic leadership and morally legitimize their conquest. By destroying the Druids, Rome could claim it was saving the Gauls from their own bloodthirsty priests. This smear campaign was devastatingly effective, obscuring the Druids' primary role as philosophers, judges, and astronomers beneath a single, bloody label for centuries. But if we peel that label away, what core of spiritual belief might we find beneath? What was the nature of the wisdom they sought in their natural sanctuaries, and how did they believe it was revealed to them? To master such a sacred and complex world, you required a mind forged not in days or months, but in decades. Julius Caesar's account gives us a staggering number. Initiates studied the Druidic arts for 20 years. This was not a casual education, it was a total transformation of consciousness, a mental discipline almost unimaginable in our age of written records and digital storage. The core of this training was memory, a vast and flawless living library held entirely in the mind. Forbidden from writing down their sacred knowledge, a student Druid had to absorb everything through listening and recitation. Think of the sheer volume, the entire legal code of their tribe, every precedent for settling disputes over land or cattle. They memorized the genealogies of kings and noble families stretching back generations, the foundational history of their people. They learned the complex movements of stars and planets to track the seasons and mark the holy days, and they committed to memory thousands upon thousands of lines of poetry, epic tales of gods and heroes, hymns of praise, and satires that could ruin a person's reputation. This was a curriculum that fused law, science, history, and art into a single, seamless body of wisdom. The power this gave them was immense, and the secrecy was absolute. Knowledge was not a commodity to be copied and spread. It was a sacred trust passed only from a master to a proven student. Within this broad intellectual class, there appears to have been a structure of specializations like branches of a great oak. The bards were the masters of word and sound. They were the poets, singers, and storytellers responsible for composing and reciting the lore the Druids studied. Their words could heal or harm, bring honor to a king, or shame him before his people. Then came the Vates, often translated as seers or diviners. These were the interpreters of the natural world, reading the future in the flight patterns of birds, the entrails of a sacrificed animal, or the ripple of water in a sacred spring. They sought the will of the gods in the fabric of everyday reality. At the apex stood the Druids proper, the philosophers and judges. They synthesized the bard's lore and the Vates' visions into practical wisdom and law. They were the ultimate arbiters, the advisors to kings, the keepers of cosmic and social balance. Visualize this not as separate jobs, but as a flowing continuum of knowledge from the artistic expression of the bard, through the intuitive interpretation of the Vate, to the philosophical and judicial application of the Druid. To hold such a system in one's mind required a mental architecture as ordered and robust as any stone temple. It speaks to a culture that revered the trained human mind as the ultimate vessel for truth. But what happened when this ancient, oral system collided with a civilization built on the written word, and when the sacred groves finally fell silent? The story of their end is also the story of how their legacy survived in the most unexpected of places. Their authority in the sacred grove translated directly into absolute power in the marketplace and the royal hall. Beyond their spiritual and intellectual roles, the Druids served as the supreme judicial authority for their people. In a world without police forces or written statutes, they were the law. Their court was wherever they stood, and their word was final. They presided over the entire spectrum of human conflict, from bitter civil disputes over the inheritance of a prized bull or the boundaries of a cultivated field, to serious criminal cases involving theft or violence. The stability of the tribe depended on their impartial wisdom. The source of their judicial power was not a scroll or a stone tablet, but the immense, memorized body of oral law they carried within them. For 20 years, a student Druid would learn not just poetry and star lore, but every precedent, every nuance of this living legal code. It covered everything from the value of different types of property to the intricate rules of hospitality and the compensation owed for injuries, known as the law of Araic or honor price. Their task was to listen to all sides, recall the relevant precedents from memory, and deliver a judgment that restored balance to the community. This was not arbitrary rule, it was the application of a sophisticated and ancient tradition. Their most feared power was the ability to excommunicate. A person who defied a Druid's ruling could be declared an outcast, barred from all religious sacrifices and festivals. In a society where identity, protection, and favor from the gods were all woven together through communal ritual, this was a punishment more terrifying than any fine or physical penalty. It was a spiritual and social death, cutting the individual off from the very fabric of life. On a larger scale, a Druid could pronounce this ban upon an entire tribe, effectively isolating them from the network of alliances and trade. This meant a Druid standing in judgment held not just the fate of an individual, but the political fate of kingdoms in his hands. His influence at the side of a king was therefore not merely advisory, it was foundational. No king would go to war or broker a peace without the Druid's counsel, for the Druid understood the legal and cosmic consequences better than anyone. We can hear a distant echo of this system in the later Brehon laws of Ireland, written down centuries after Christianity had taken root. Brehon, meaning judge, seems to be a direct descendant of the Druidic legal tradition, stripped of its overtly pagan elements but retaining the complex precedent-based structure and the focus on compensation over punishment. The principles of restorative justice and the detailed tariffs for every wrong found in these old Irish texts likely preserve the ghost of the Druids' oral code. It suggests their greatest legacy was not in mysterious rituals, but in a profound concept of order where law emerged from nature, memory, and the deep need for communal harmony. With this understanding of their central role, the Roman campaign against them comes into even sharper, more pragmatic focus. This was not just a war against priests, it was a targeted strike against the very judicial and political nervous system of Celtic society. To truly dismantle that system, Rome needed more than soldiers. It needed a replacement, a new kind of wisdom that could rewrite an entire people's memory. The Druids' mastery of law and memory was mirrored by their profound understanding of the sky. To govern the rhythms of life, they first had to read the clockwork of the heavens. This brings us to the great stone enigmas that dot the landscape, places like Stonehenge. While the iconic stone circle on Salisbury Plain was built over 1,000 years before the historical Druids emerged, these later Celtic sages almost certainly inherited and used such ancient, sacred spaces. They stood within those mighty rings not as builders but as interpreters, reading alignments their ancestors had set to mark the sun's extreme journey. For the Druids, these monuments were not relics, they were active temples, cosmic calendars etched in stone where the divine schedule could be witnessed firsthand. At the winter solstice, the darkest day, they would gather to witness the sunrise align with the heel stone, a promise of the sun's return and the rebirth of the year. Their role was to orchestrate the ceremonies that harmonized human life with these celestial events, turning astronomy into liturgy. Their knowledge was not confined to grand monuments. They tracked the more subtle dance of the moon, its phases dictating the timing of rituals and the start of new months. This sophisticated, practical astronomy was codified in objects like the Coligny Calendar, a fragmented bronze plaque discovered in France. This is not a simple list of days, it is a complex lunisolar system, reconciling the cycles of the moon with the solar year over a 30-year span. It marks not only the solstices and equinoxes but the great Celtic festivals, Samhain, Imbolc, Beltane, and Lugnasad, which divided the year into pastoral and agricultural seasons. This calendar reveals a mind that saw time not as a straight line but as a sacred wheel turning through periods of light and darkness, growth and rest. Their observations were woven into the very fabric of their stories. The mythology of a sun god captured and needing to be freed at the winter solstice, or a goddess whose moods shifted with the moon, were not mere tales. They were narrative expressions of cosmic truths, teaching the people their place within a vast, animate universe. The Druid, then, was the bridge between earth and sky, translating the silent movements of stars into the songs, laws, and festivals that ordered society. But when the Roman war machine finally crushed their political power and felled their sacred groves, where could this deep, ancient wisdom possibly find refuge? The image of a giant wicker man, its woven form filled with living victims and set ablaze against the night sky, is perhaps the darkest and most enduring stain on the Druidic name. This horrifying spectacle comes to us directly from the pen of Julius Caesar, who described it as a method of sacrifice to the gods. Another Roman writer, Strabo, added chilling detail, speaking of divination by observing the death throes of a stabbed prisoner. These are not casual observations, they are graphic accusations from the very empire that sought to conquer and civilize the Celtic world. So we must confront this grim question head-on. Was human sacrifice a core, brutal reality of Druidic practice, or was it the ultimate piece of Roman propaganda, a monstrous fiction designed to justify their own brutal conquest? To find an answer, we must hold the classical texts in one hand and the silent evidence of the earth in the other, and see if they tell the same story. The Roman accounts are undeniably sensational, and they served a clear political purpose. By painting the Druids as bloodthirsty priests presiding over barbaric rites, Rome could frame its military campaigns as a moral crusade, a civilizing mission to save the Gauls from their own savage leaders. It is the classic tactic of an empire: dehumanize your enemy to legitimize your violence. Yet, to dismiss the accusation entirely as fiction might be too simple. Many ancient societies, in moments of extreme desperation, famine, plague, or the threat of invasion, performed the ultimate offering, a human life, in a desperate attempt to appease the gods and restore cosmic balance. The Celtic worldview, which saw the spirit in every tree and spring, likely held a similar concept of sacred reciprocity. The key is whether this was a frequent, central tenet of their religion as the Romans claimed, or a rare, terrifying last resort. This is where archaeology enters the debate, not with clear answers but with deeply ambiguous whispers. Consider Lindoman, the body of a young man discovered in a peat bog in Cheshire, England. His death around 2,000 years ago was meticulously violent, a ritualized threefold killing. He was struck on the head, garroted, and his throat was cut before being placed face down in the waters. The care and sequence suggest this was not a murder but a sacrifice. His last meal included a charred griddle cake, possibly a ceremonial food. He is not alone. Other bog bodies across northern Europe show similar signs of ritual killing. This evidence is undeniable. People were sacrificed in Celtic regions during the Druidic era. But it does not prove the Druids ordered it, nor does it confirm the scale and spectacle of the wicker man. It points to a practice that existed within the broader cultural and spiritual milieu they inhabited. The scholarly debate therefore hangs in a tense balance. On one side, the argument for propaganda highlights Rome's own hypocrisy, as they filled their amphitheaters with gladiatorial bloodsport and lined their roads with crucifixions, all forms of state-sanctioned ritual killing. Their outrage seems selective. On the other side, the argument for ritual reality must contend with the physical remains, which suggest a practice, however occasional, that was real. The most likely truth lies somewhere in the murky middle. Human sacrifice probably did occur in the Celtic world, perhaps in times of profound crisis, as the ultimate gesture to the gods. The Romans, encountering stories or even evidence of this, seized upon it, magnified it, and broadcast it as the defining feature of Druidism, transforming a complex intellectual class into cartoonish villains. They took a grain of terrifying truth and built a mountain of propaganda upon it. This deliberate distortion was so effective that for 2,000 years, the very word Druid conjured shadows of screaming victims and pagan flames, utterly obscuring their roles as judges, astronomers, and poets. But if we scrape away that dark veneer of accusation, what deeper spiritual philosophy might we find beneath? What was the nature of the wisdom they guarded so fiercely in their minds and their sacred groves? The search for divine will was woven into the very fabric of the natural world. For the Druids and their specialized seers, the universe was not silent, it was constantly speaking. Every rustle in the leaves, every pattern in the clouds, and every cry of a bird was a potential message from the otherworld, a piece of a cosmic puzzle waiting to be interpreted. This practice of divination was not superstition. It was a sophisticated science of observation, a vital method for seeking guidance before any major decision, from declaring war to planting crops. The Romans, both fascinated and repelled, recorded several of their methods. One of the most unsettling to the modern mind was extinguished, the examination of a sacrificed victim's entrails. After a ritual offering, likely an animal like a sheep or a bull, a seer would carefully study the liver, lungs, and heart. The color, texture, and any unusual markings or growths were read as a direct report from the gods on the health of the tribe or the outcome of a planned venture. It was a grim but logical system for a people who believed the spirit resided within all living things. The sacrificed creature became a messenger, its inner landscape a map of divine intent. A more public and constant form of divination was augury, the interpretation of bird flight. Imagine a faith standing on a windswept hilltop, his eyes fixed on the sky. The approach of ravens from the east might signal a coming challenge, while the swift, direct flight of a hawk could be seen as a sign of decisive victory. The type of bird, its direction, its call, and even the formation of a flock were all meaningful data points. This practice required a lifetime of accumulated knowledge, a deep familiarity with local bird species and their behaviors, turning the sky itself into a living, moving text. Beyond the visceral and the aerial, there was the deeply personal realm of dream interpretation. Dreams were not random neurological noise, they were visits, journeys where the soul could travel and receive visions. A chieftain plagued by a recurring dream of a crumbling fort would certainly seek a druid's counsel to decipher its warning. The seers themselves were believed to possess the ability to enter trance-like states, perhaps through rhythmic chanting, fasting, or sensory deprivation, to open a direct channel for prophecy. In these altered states, the faith might deliver utterances in a cryptic, poetic language, words that would then be translated and analyzed by the higher-ranking druids for their legal and political implications. This entire worldview reveals a fundamental belief that the divine was not distant and detached but intimately engaged, communicating through the medium of nature itself. A flowing river was not just water, it was a conversation. A gathering of crows was not just birds, it was a council. To be a seer was to be fluent in this hidden language, to listen when everyone else only heard noise. It was a role that demanded both extreme sensitivity and unshakable conviction, for the messages they decoded could alter the fate of kings. And when that fate turned to conquest, when the Roman war machine finally arrived at the last sacred groves, this profound connection to the land faced its ultimate test. While the seers listened to the whispers of nature, the bards gave those whispers a voice that could shake a hall and define a kingdom. As the poetic arm of the Druidic order, the bards were far more than mere entertainers. They were the living, breathing memory of their people. In a society that forbade writing its sacred and historical knowledge, the bard carried the entire identity of the tribe in his mind and on his tongue. His primary duty was to memorize and flawlessly recite the genealogies of the ruling families, tracing lineages back through generations, often to mythical or divine ancestors. This was not dry recitation, it was a performance of power and legitimacy. At a king's feast, a bard's song could reinforce the ruler's right to lead by connecting him to a glorious past, or it could subtly undermine a rival by omitting a key ancestor from the tale. The history of battles, treaties, and migrations was also stored in this way, transformed into rhythmic, alliterative poetry to make it unforgettable. Accompanied by the haunting strains of a lyre-like instrument called the crute, the bard's performance was a sacred act, weaving the audience into the ongoing tapestry of their own story. The skill required was immense, involving years of training in complex poetic meters, vast vocabularies, and the mental discipline to hold thousands of lines in perfect recall. This oral history served as the ultimate social glue, binding the community to its leaders and its past. When the Roman conquest swept across Gaul and Britain, targeting the political power of the Druids, the bardic tradition faced a crisis. Yet in the unconquered fringes, particularly in Ireland and later in Wales, it found a refuge. Here, the bards continued their craft, adapting over centuries. As Christianity arrived and brought the technology of writing with it, the old oral tales faced a new danger of being lost or corrupted. In a remarkable act of cultural preservation, monastic scribes in Ireland began to write down these stories. They transcribed the epic cycles they heard from the bards, often framing the old pagan gods as legendary heroes or placing their tales in a distant pre-Christian past. This is how we inherited treasures like the Ulster cycle, with its tragic hero Cú Chulainn, and the Welsh collection known as the Mabinogion. These written texts are not direct Druidic scriptures, they are medieval manuscripts filtered through a Christian lens. But within their pages, we catch clear, powerful echoes of a much older world. We find the sacred importance of the king's marriage to the goddess of the land, the magical power of the spoken curse or blessing, and the otherworldly realms that exist just beside our own, all concepts central to the Druidic worldview. The bards, by transforming memory into art, ensured that the voice of the oak knowers was never fully silenced. It simply changed its form, passing from the feasting hall to the vellum page, waiting for us to learn how to listen. The power of the bard's voice could not withstand the sound of marching legions. The final, decisive conflict between the Druidic world and the Roman Empire was not merely a military campaign. It was a clash of two fundamentally opposed visions of reality. On one side stood an empire of written law, stone cities, and a pantheon of gods neatly integrated into the machinery of state. On the other stood the oral tradition of the sacred grove, where law flowed from memory and divinity spoke through the rustling oak. The Romans understood that to conquer the land, they first had to conquer its spiritual and intellectual heart. This led to one of the most chilling episodes in ancient history, the assault on the island of Mona, modern Anglesey, off the coast of Wales. In the year 60 of the Common Era, the Roman general Suetonius Paulinus led his troops across the narrow strait. What awaited them on the far shore, as recorded by the historian Tacitus, was a scene designed to freeze the blood of any soldier. The beach was lined not with Celtic warriors alone, but with a terrifying opposing force. Black-robed druidesses, their hair wild, screamed curses to the heavens. Druids stood with arms raised, invoking terrible prayers. Armed men moved among them, and the entire shoreline was thick with a crowd of onlookers, creating a wall of sound and fanatical resistance. For a moment, the disciplined Roman army hesitated, stunned by this supernatural spectacle. Then their officers rallied them, mocking their fears and urging them forward. The legionaries advanced and cut down everyone in their path. The sacred groves of Mona, the last great sanctuary of the Druidic order in Britain, were methodically destroyed, the altars smashed, and the ancient trees put to the torch. This was not just a battle, it was a ritual extermination, a symbolic demonstration that Roman power could desecrate the most holy sites with impunity. The attack on Mona was the dramatic climax of a longer, systematic policy. Decades earlier, Julius Caesar had identified the Druids as the chief instigators of rebellion in Gaul. He noted that disaffected nobles would often travel to Britain for Druidic training and then return to foment resistance. To break the Celtic spirit, Rome had to break this intellectual network. Following their conquests, the Romans enacted specific laws banning Druidic practices, particularly the ones they had so loudly condemned. Emperor Augustus forbade Roman citizens from participating in Druidic rites. Later, Emperor Claudius officially suppressed the order altogether in Roman territories. The motive was starkly pragmatic. The Druids were the leadership class of anti-Roman resistance. Their system of oral law and tribal judgment was a direct rival to Roman civil administration. Their spiritual authority undermined the state-sanctioned worship of the Roman gods and the cult of the emperor. They had to be removed not just as priests but as judges, teachers, and politicians. With their public role outlawed and their sanctuaries destroyed, the organized, powerful Druidism described by Caesar began to wither in Roman-controlled Gaul and Britain. The great oak of knowledge was felled, its roots severed from the soil of public life. Yet deep in the unconquered wilderness of Ireland and in the stubborn memories of the people, a spark remained alive. What could possibly survive of a tradition after such a thorough and violent erasure? Ireland remained a land beyond the reach of Roman legions, a sanctuary where the old ways could breathe. While the sacred groves of Britain and Gaul fell to the axe, in Ireland the Druidic order, or Donna, the people of the arts, continued to function as judges, historians, and advisors to kings for centuries after the fall of Rome. Here, the collision with a new world order came not with the sword, but with the cross in the 5th century. This encounter between the native Druidic tradition and the incoming Christian faith did not result in simple annihilation. Instead, it sparked a complex and profound cultural fusion, a transformation where the old wisdom was not erased but carefully rewoven into a new tapestry. One of the most beautiful examples of this fusion is the figure of Saint Bridget of Kildare. Her story is inextricably linked with the pre-Christian Celtic goddess Brigid, a deity of fire, poetry, healing, and smithcraft. The saint inherited these very attributes, becoming the patroness of poets, healers, and blacksmiths. Her feast day, Imbolc on February 1st, is the ancient Celtic festival marking the beginning of spring. The sacred fire kept by her nuns at Kildare was said to have burned perpetually, tended by a ritual that forbade men from entering the inner sanctum, echoing the guarded, feminine knowledge of the older tradition. Saint Bridget seems less a replacement for the goddess and more her continuation in a new form, a bridge between the world of the Druids and the world of the monasteries. This pattern of integration was strategic and profound. The early Irish Christian church, isolated from the continent, was pragmatic. To convert a people deeply attached to their ancestral lore, it was wiser to baptize the stories than to ban them. The learned class of Druids, with their decades of training in memory and law, found a new home within the monastic system. A man trained to hold thousands of lines of poetry in his head could just as easily memorize the Psalms. His skill in arbitrating tribal law translated seamlessly into helping to compile the early Irish legal codes, known as the Brehon Laws. And so, the very monks who copied the Gospels by candlelight also took up their pens to record the ancient tales they heard from the lips of the last Fili, the poetic descendants of the bards. In quiet scriptoria on islands like Iona or in monasteries like Clonmacnoise, scribes wrote down the epic cycles of the Tain Bo Cuelge, the adventures of Cu Chulainn, and the voyages to the other world. They framed these stories as the history of the pagan ancestors, placing them in a distant, pre-Christian past acceptable to their new faith. In doing so, they accidentally created a priceless treasure, a fossilized record of the mythic landscape the Druids once interpreted. The gods became heroic kings with long lives, the sacred cauldrons of plenty became magical artifacts, and the Druids themselves appeared in the stories as powerful advisors, like Cathbad, who foretold the destiny of the hero. This was not a perfect preservation, it was a translation filtered through a Christian worldview, yet it is the closest whisper we have to the original voice of the Oak Knowers. The old oral law became the written Brehon law, the old poetic meter influenced new Christian hymns, and the reverence for sacred wells and trees was redirected to saints and holy sites. The Druids did not vanish in Ireland, they changed their robes. Their legacy survived not as a rival religion, but as the deep cultural bedrock of a newly Christian nation, its soul forever shaped by the memory of the sacred grove. This survival in manuscript form, however, created a new kind of mystery for a much later age, one that would misinterpret those medieval pages and imagine a past that never was. The gods of the Druids were not distant figures on a mountaintop, but presences felt in the very landscape. Unlike the Greek or Roman pantheons with their elaborate family dramas and human-like personalities, the Celtic deities were often defined by their functions and their intimate connection to specific places and powers of nature. This was a spirituality of immanence, where the divine lived in the roaring head of a river, the deep silence of a forest, or the fierce heat of a blacksmith's forge. Reconstructing this pantheon is like assembling a mosaic from scattered, shimmering pieces, but the figures that emerge are powerful and distinct. There was Lug, known as the Long-Handed or the Shining One. He was not the god of one thing, but the master of all arts and crafts, a patron of kingship, law, and skill itself. His festival, Lugnasad, in early August, celebrated his foster mother, the earth goddess Tailtiu, and marked the beginning of the harvest, tying his luminous skill directly to the fertility of the land. Then there was the Morrigan, a complex and terrifying figure often appearing as a trio of sisters. She was a goddess of war, but not in the simple sense of battle. She represented sovereignty, fate, and the terrifying power of the land itself. She could appear as a crow on the battlefield, foretelling doom, or as a washerwoman at a ford, seen cleansing the bloody armor of those about to die. Her presence was a reminder that kings ruled only with the land's consent, a concept the Druids themselves would have upheld. From the deep woods emerged Cernunnos, the Horned One, depicted on artifacts like the magnificent Gundestrup cauldron. He is shown cross-legged, often with antlers, holding a torque and a serpent, with stags and other wild creatures at his side. He is a lord of animals, of fertility, and of the underworld, a mediator between the civilized world and the untamed wild, between life and death. And we have already met Brigid, the triple goddess of healing, poetry, and smithcraft, whose sacred flame was later kept by her saintly namesake. These were not gods who demanded grand temples. Their altars were the ancient trees, the bubbling springs, and the liminal spaces where the world met the other world. The Druids served as the essential intermediaries in this relationship. They were the technicians of the sacred, the ones who knew the correct rituals, chants, and offerings to communicate with Lug for a successful harvest, to petition the Morrigan for victory in a just war, or to honor Cernunnos for the abundance of the hunt. A ritual at a sacred grove was not a passive observance, it was an active act of cosmic maintenance. Through their actions, the Druids believed they helped maintain the delicate balance between the human tribe, the natural world, and the divine forces that animated both. They performed ceremonies to ensure the sun would return after the solstice, to bless the seeds before planting, and to consecrate a new king, literally marrying him to the goddess of the land. The stunning imagery on the Gundestrup cauldron, with its procession of warriors, its horned Cernunnos, and its scenes of sacrifice and rebirth, gives us a frozen glimpse of this rich symbolic world. It is a ritual object that likely held a central place in ceremonies, its silver panels telling stories of the gods that the Druids would interpret. This spiritual framework, so deeply rooted in place and function, faced an existential threat not from theological debate, but from a rival empire with a very different idea of the sacred. How could a faith of forests and springs possibly withstand the ordered, stone-built religion of Rome? Their deep connection to the land was not a passive belief, but a living rhythm marked by fire, feast, and sacred ceremony. The Druids did not see time as a straight line marching forward, but as a great turning wheel. This wheel of the year was divided by 4 great fire festivals, each one a hinge point in the cycle of life, death, and rebirth, where the community gathered to align its spirit with the turning seasons. The most potent of these festivals was Samhain, celebrated from sunset on October 31st into November 1st. This was the Celtic New Year, the end of the harvest and the beginning of the dark, introspective half of the year. The Druids taught that at Samhain, the veil between the world of the living and the other world grew so thin that spirits, ancestors, and fairy folk could cross over. It was a time of profound ambiguity, both solemn and chaotic. Communal fires were extinguished, and a great sacred bonfire was lit by the Druids on a central hill. From this new, pure flame, every household would relight their own hearth, symbolically binding the community together for the winter ahead. Offerings of food and drink were left outside for wandering spirits, and it was believed the Druids might perform divinations to seek guidance for the year to come. The modern echoes are unmistakable. The jack-o'-lanterns, the costumes, the sense of playful dread, all find their distant origin in this ancient night when the Druids stood as gatekeepers between the worlds. As the wheel turned through the deepest dark, it arrived at Imbolc around February 1st. This was a festival of subtle, returning light and the first stirrings of life. The name itself is thought to mean in the belly, referring to the pregnancy of ewes as lambing season began. It was sacred to the goddess Brigid, the keeper of the sacred flame of healing and of poetic inspiration. Rituals focused on purification and the welcoming of the growing sun. The Druids would likely oversee ceremonies to bless the seeds stored for spring planting and to honor Brigid by tending perpetual flames. People might craft Brigid's crosses from rushes, a protective symbol for the home. Imbolc was a quiet, hopeful festival, a promise whispered at the end of winter that the Druids helped the people to hear. Then with explosive joy came Beltane at the start of May. If Samhain welcomed the dark, Beltane celebrated the bright, fertile power of summer. It was a fire festival of life, passion, and protection. The Druids would light 2 great bonfires on hilltops, and the people, along with their livestock, would pass between the flames. This was believed to purify the animals, ensure their fertility, and safeguard them from disease in the coming season. It was a time of courtship and marriage, of gathering the first green shoots, and of acknowledging the earth's vibrant, creative energy. The maypole, with its ribbons weaving a pattern of unity, is a later folk memory of this ancient celebration of life's interconnectedness. The final major festival was Lugnasad around August 1st, named for the god Lugh. This was not a somber event, but a vibrant, communal gathering of thanksgiving at the start of the harvest. While Lugh was a solar deity, the festival honored his foster mother, Tailtiu, who is said to have cleared the plains of Ireland for agriculture. The Druids would preside over the first fruit harvest, making offerings of the first cut grain. But Lugnasad was also a time for great athletic games, horse racing, storytelling competitions, and massive feasts. It was a celebration of skill, community, and the tangible results of the year's labor, a moment for the Druids to unite the people in gratitude before the hard work of the full harvest began. Each of these festivals was a living prayer, a way for the Druids to translate the silent language of the seasons into actions that strengthen the tribe's bond with the land and with each other. They managed the sacred fire that warmed the community, both literally and spiritually, throughout the eternal turn of the wheel. The sacred grove was also a living pharmacy, its roots and leaves holding secrets of both body and spirit. For the Druids, the line between a medicinal herb and a magical charm simply did not exist. Healing was a holistic art, a process that required treating the physical ailment while also addressing the spiritual imbalance that might have caused it. Their vast botanical knowledge, passed down orally for generations, positioned them as the primary healers of their communities, blending practical remedy with sacred ritual. At the very center of this green wisdom stood the oak tree, the Drew from which they took their name. This mighty tree was revered not just as a symbol of strength and endurance, but as a cosmic axis, a pillar connecting the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. Its wood was sacred, its acorns potentially a food source, and its presence marked a place of supreme power. But the oak's greatest magic was believed to manifest in a rare and peculiar guest, the mistletoe. As Pliny the Elder recorded, the Druids held the mistletoe that grew upon an oak in the highest esteem, considering it a celestial gift, an all-heal sent from the gods themselves. The ritual for harvesting it was precise and solemn. A white-robed Druid would climb the tree, using a golden sickle to cut the mistletoe, ensuring it was caught in a white cloth before it could be desecrated by touching the ground. 2 white bulls would be sacrificed in thanksgiving. This elaborate ceremony underscores how the plant was viewed not as a simple parasite, but as the concentrated essence of the oak's sacred power, a potent substance for healing, fertility, and protection. Beyond the iconic oak and mistletoe, the Druidic landscape was populated with other powerful flora, each with its own spirit and purpose. The yew tree, with its incredibly long lifespan and toxic red berries, was deeply associated with death, rebirth, and eternity. It was often planted in sacred precincts and later in churchyards, a silent guardian over the threshold between worlds. The rowan tree, with its bright red berries in autumn, was a tree of potent protection. Its wood was used to make amulets and to ward doorways from evil spirits or malicious magic. Then there were the herbs gathered with care and incantation. Vervain, known as the Druid's herb, was prized for its purifying properties, used in rituals to cleanse sacred spaces and in remedies to treat ailments. The Druid healer's approach would have been a seamless fusion. To treat a wound, they might apply a poultice of yarrow, a well-known styptic herb, to stop the bleeding. But the application would be accompanied by a chant or a prayer, calling upon the spirit of the plant to lend its power and asking the gods to guide the healing. A fever might be treated with willow bark, which we now know contains salicin, the natural compound from which aspirin is derived, while also performing a ritual to cool the patient's spirit. This was not mere superstition. It was a coherent system that acknowledged illness as a disruption in the individual's harmony with the natural and supernatural world. The healer's role was to restore that balance on all levels. Visualize a druid at dawn, gathering dew from the leaves of a sacred plant, knowing the time of day and phase of the moon affected its potency. See them whispering to the herb as they harvested it, thanking it for its gift. Their pharmacy had no walls. It was the entire living, breathing forest, a testament to a worldview that saw every root and branch as a thread in the web of life. This profound connection to the green world was just one facet of their role as keepers of equilibrium. To maintain the health of the tribe, they also had to master the invisible forces that governed fortune and fate, a skill that required interpreting signs hidden in the most unexpected places. A warrior facing the Roman line drew courage not from promises of a distant heaven, but from a truth whispered by the Druids. His soul was immortal and would simply find a new home. This belief in the eternal journey of the spirit formed the philosophical core of Druidic teaching, a concept so powerful it directly shaped the Celtic character on the battlefield. Julius Caesar observed this with a strategist's keen eye. He wrote that a principal doctrine of the Druids was that souls do not perish, but after death pass from one person to another. This belief, known as metempsychosis or transmigration, meant that physical death was not an end, but a doorway, a momentary pause before the essence of a person was reborn into a new life, perhaps as another warrior, a poet, or even a creature of the wild. Caesar noted this made the Celtic warriors utterly contemptuous of death. Why fear the blade if your spirit is indestructible and your story continues? This was not a vague hope, it was a foundational truth that removed the ultimate terror from combat, explaining the ferocious, seemingly reckless bravery that so often stunned the disciplined Roman legions. It was a spirituality of profound continuity, where the individual soul was a single note in an endless, cycling song. Yet alongside this linear journey of rebirth existed a parallel destination, a place not of return but of eternal rest. This was the otherworld, the realm that shimmered just beyond the veil of everyday perception. In later Irish tales, it bore beautiful names like Tir na an Og, the land of youth, or Magmel, the plain of honey. This was not a somber underworld of shadows, but a radiant, joyful realm of perpetual feasting, music, and beauty, where time stood still and aging was impossible. It was a world of inverted logic, where a single day of feasting could equal 100 years in the mortal realm. Access to this paradise was not gained through moral judgment, but through invitation, adventure, or luck. Its entrance was hidden in the very landscape the Druids held sacred, a sudden mist on a familiar hillside, the still, deep waters of a lonely lake, or the silent, grassy mound of an ancient burial tomb, a Shia. To step into one of these liminal spaces at the right moment, perhaps guided by a fairy woman or a magical animal, was to cross the threshold. These dual beliefs, the cycling soul and the static paradise, created a rich and flexible vision of what lay beyond. They influenced everything from art to burial rites. The stunning metalwork of the Celts, with its intricate, never-ending spirals and triskells, seems to visually echo the concept of eternal cycles and interconnected realms. When a chieftain was laid to rest, he was often buried with his weapons, his chariot, and vessels of food and drink. For a long time, archaeologists interpreted these simply as grave goods for use in an afterlife. But within the Druidic framework, they take on a more nuanced meaning. Were they supplies for the soul's immediate journey to the otherworld, or were they offerings for the long cycle of rebirth, comforts to be carried in essence from one life to the next? The inclusion of gaming boards and musical instruments hints at a belief that the pleasures of this world, the strategy of the mind, and the joy of art were also part of the soul's eternal inheritance. This spiritual framework, which could envision both a cyclical return and a final, glorious rest, offered a profound comfort. It meant the community was never truly separated from its ancestors, and that every ending carried within it the seed of a new beginning. It was a philosophy woven from the patterns of nature itself, from the falling leaf that nourishes the soil for new growth. And it was this deeply rooted, resilient worldview that would face its greatest challenge not from swords, but from a new message of resurrection carried by monks from across the sea. The deep spiritual connection to an eternal cycle was severed by history, its roots seemingly buried forever. Yet the story of the Druids did not end with the last sacred fire on Mona. It lay dormant for centuries, a seed waiting for the right cultural soil to sprout anew. That moment arrived not in an ancient forest, but in the elegant salons and wild imaginations of 18th century Britain. As the Industrial Revolution began to reshape the landscape with smoke and steel, a powerful counter-movement arose, Romanticism. This was a philosophy that yearned for a lost, purer past, a mystical connection to nature and ancient wisdom. It was the perfect climate for the Druids to be rediscovered, or more accurately, reinvented. Antiquarians, men obsessed with old stones and older stories, began to puzzle over the monumental ruins dotting the British countryside. The most famous of these was William Stukeley. In the 1740s, he published a revolutionary and deeply flawed theory. He declared that the Great Stone Circle of Stonehenge was not a prehistoric temple, but a Druidic temple. Stukeley, blending his own Christian beliefs with wild speculation, portrayed the Druids as noble, patriarchal priests of a lost monotheistic faith, wise philosophers who aligned their temples to the sun. It was a beautiful fiction, a complete misinterpretation of the timeline, as Stonehenge was millennia older than the historical Druids, but it was a fiction that captured the public's heart. Suddenly, the Druids were no longer the barbaric villains of Roman propaganda. They were romantic heroes, native British sages who embodied a spiritual connection to the land that the modern, industrial age had lost. This romantic seed grew through the 19th century, often intertwining with growing national pride. In Wales, a stonemason and poet named Edward Williams, who called himself Iolo Morgannwg, presented a series of ancient Welsh manuscripts. He claimed they contained the authentic rituals and teachings of the original Druids. They were, in fact, brilliant forgeries, products of Iolo's own fertile imagination and his passionate desire to give Wales a glorious, unique cultural heritage. From his invented lore came much of the ceremonial structure, the use of the terms bard, ovate, and druid as grades, and the idea of the gorsedd, a gathering of bards. His fabrications were so compelling they were accepted as truth for decades and became the bedrock of the Welsh Eisteddfod festival. This creative energy soon formalized into organizations. The ancient Order of Druids was founded in London in 1781, initially as a fraternal benefit society similar to the Freemasons, using Druidic imagery for its ceremonies. Then, in the early 20th century, came the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids, or OBOD, founded by Ross Nichols. This order, drawing on Iolo Morgannwg's work and other sources, systematized modern Druidry into a teachable spiritual path. It is crucial to understand the distinction here. Modern Druidry, or Druidism, is a revivalist, nature-based spirituality. It is not, and does not claim to be, a direct continuation of the ancient Celtic Druidic order. That original tradition was extinguished. What exists today is a beautiful reimagining, a spiritual path built using fragments of archaeology, medieval Irish and Welsh literature, and a great deal of inspired creativity. It is a living tradition that asks, what would a nature-honoring, wisdom-seeking path look like if it were rooted in this land today? You can see its vibrant expression at places like Stonehenge during the summer solstice. Here, modern Druids in white robes stand alongside pagans, tourists, and revelers as the sun crests the heel stone. They may chant, sing, or hold a simple ceremony honoring the light. This is not a reenactment of a lost rite. It is a new ritual on an ancient stage, a conscious choice to connect the human spirit to the cosmic cycle in a place heavy with time. The tradition continues to evolve, embracing ecological activism, meditation, and creative arts. The modern Druid is less a tribal judge and more a seeker, finding the sacred in a forest grove, a city park, or a backyard garden, striving to become, in the old sense of the word, an oak knower for a new age. This modern reconnection with the sacred landscape is not an attempt to live in the past, but a conscious choice to walk a path inspired by it. Neo-Druidry, as it is often called, is a vibrant, living spiritual practice that has grown from those romantic seeds into a diverse and deeply meaningful tradition for thousands of people around the world. At its heart, it is a nature-based spirituality, a way of seeing the divine not in a distant heaven, but in the living breath of the forest, the flow of a river, and the turning of the seasons. The core principles are beautifully simple, yet profoundly transformative. First is a deep reverence for nature, seeing the earth not as a resource to be used, but as a sacred web of life of which we are an integral part. This often translates into a strong ethic of environmental stewardship, where spiritual practice includes gardening, conservation work, or simply mindful time spent in a local park. The second principle is the celebration of the seasonal wheel, the same 8 festivals of the ancient year, from Samhain to the solstices. Modern Druids mark these turning points with rituals that honor the unique energy of each season, grounding their lives in the natural rhythm of growth, harvest, decay, and rebirth. The third pillar is the cultivation of creativity, the bardic arts. This recognizes that inspiration, whether through poetry, music, painting, or storytelling, is a sacred force. A modern druid might keep a journal, learn an instrument, or write prayers as a way to connect with the the flowing spirit of inspiration. Finally, there is the pursuit of wisdom, or the ovate path. This involves a commitment to personal growth, meditation, the study of myth and symbolism, and the development of intuition, seeking to understand the deeper patterns of life. Modern druids draw inspiration from the historical fragments, the archaeology, and the old tales, but they freely adapt this inspiration for today's world. They understand that we cannot recreate the exact beliefs of a 2,000-year-old oral culture, nor would most want to. Instead, they ask, what does it mean to be an oak knower in the 21st century? For many, it means integrating these ancient themes of connection into a modern life. A ritual might be held in a backyard garden instead of a primordial forest. The deities invoked could be from the Celtic pantheon, or they might be understood as archetypal forces of nature. The community is incredibly diverse. Some practitioners are solitary, developing their own personal practice of meditation and seasonal observance. Others join organized groves, which are like small congregations that meet regularly for study, celebration, and mutual support. Larger orders provide structured courses of learning and a sense of shared tradition. This is a tradition without a central dogma or a single holy book, which allows for a beautiful spectrum of belief, from hard polytheism to agnostic nature reverence. One of the most important roles of contemporary druidry is to clarify the old misconceptions. Modern druids are not attempting to perform ancient blood rites or claim political power. They are, by and large, peaceful people seeking a meaningful, grounded spirituality that honors the earth and fosters personal wisdom. They represent a direct, living response to the ancient mystery, proving that the call of the sacred grove, though silenced for centuries, was never truly forgotten. It simply learned a new language, one spoken in the rustle of leaves in a city park and the quiet contemplation of a kitchen altar, a testament to humanity's enduring need to find the divine in the world around us. The white robes of modern druidry at Stonehenge are just one version of the oak knower that lives in our minds. Far more pervasive are the images conjured by our stories and screens, where the druid has been transformed into a powerful and often wildly distorted archetype. Perhaps the most affectionately inaccurate portrayal comes from the beloved Asterix comics. Here, Getafix is the village druid, a kindly, white-bearded figure whose primary role is brewing a magic potion that gives the Gauls superhuman strength to defy the Romans. He is wise, yes, but also occasionally bumbling, more of a quirky community chemist than a supreme judge or political mastermind. This humorous, gentle caricature strips away the immense authority and feared judicial power of the historical druids, reducing them to a single, magical function. Yet it cemented the image of the druid as a benevolent, nature-connected wise man for generations of readers. It is a simplification, but a warm and enduring one. A far more dramatic transformation occurred in the realm of fantasy, when the creators of Dungeons and Dragons needed a class of nature-wielding spellcasters. They looked to the misty hills of Celtic legend and found the druid. In this world, and in the countless video games like World of Warcraft that followed its lead, the druid became a powerhouse of primal magic. They are shapeshifters, morphing into bears, wolves, or great cats to fight. They command the elements, summoning roots to entangle foes and calling down storms. They are healers, tapping into the life force of the world itself. This archetype, the nature priest as a combat-ready adventurer, is thrilling but a complete fiction. The historical druids were scholars and judges, not frontline warriors who turned into animals. Their power was social, legal, and spiritual, not a suite of combat spells. Yet this fantasy version has become so dominant that for millions it is the definition of a druid. television has offered its own gritty, sensational take. The series Britannia presents the Druids as a terrifying, fanatical theocracy, a shadowy order of manipulative and ruthless priests who control the tribes through fear, hallucinogenic rituals, and brutal sacrifice. This portrayal leans heavily into the darkest Roman propaganda, amplifying the accusation of human sacrifice and political manipulation, while largely ignoring their roles as astronomers, poets, and legal arbiters. It is a compelling drama, but it paints with the broadest and bloodiest brush, trading historical nuance for primal terror and conspiracy. So what do all these pop culture druids have in common? They are almost always simplifiers. They take one facet of the complex historical figure and blow it up into an entire identity. The asterisk druid is the potion maker. The fantasy game druid is the shape-shifting nature mage. The television druid is the sinister high priest of blood rites. They rarely, if ever, show the druid presiding over a complex land dispute, reciting a 300-line legal precedent from memory, or calculating the precise date for Beltane by observing the stars. These pop culture tropes keep the name alive and spark curiosity, but they also create a funhouse mirror version of the past, one where the oak knower's profound connection to law and cosmic order is swapped out for more visually exciting or more sinister magic. Yet, in a strange way, this very act of reinvention proves the enduring power of the archetype. Our stories keep reaching for this figure who stands between humanity and the wild, who speaks for the forest and the spirit. It suggests that even when we get the details wrong, we are still captivated by the core idea of a wisdom drawn not from books, but from the living world itself. And that enduring fascination begs a final, practical question. If the real Druids left no written records, and our modern images are mostly fiction, where does a genuine seeker turn to find the closest thing to their original voice? The silent testimony of the earth is our most honest witness. While the Romans wrote with bias and the medieval monks wrote with hindsight, archaeology offers objects frozen in time, artifacts that speak a language of symbols, not words. To understand the spiritual world the Druids moved within, we must examine the treasures they left behind, not in tombs, but in the most sacred places of all, the dark waters and deep bogs. One of the most breathtaking of these finds is the Gundestrup cauldron. Discovered in a peat bog in Denmark, this massive silver vessel is a masterpiece of Celtic artistry, likely crafted in the 1st century before the Common Era. Its panels are a crowded, mysterious comic book of myth. We see a horned figure, cross-legged, holding a torque and a serpent, unmistakably Sir Nunnos, the Lord of Animals. A line of infantrymen march with spears and shields, while a giant figure dips a smaller one headfirst into a cauldron, perhaps a scene of ritual drowning or rebirth. There are processions, exotic animals like elephants, and deities with wheel symbols. This was not a cooking pot, it was a central ritual object, perhaps used in ceremonies where a sacred drink was shared. It is a direct window into the iconography of their faith, a visual liturgy showing the gods, the warriors under their protection, and the transformative power of ritual sacrifice, all themes the Druids would have interpreted and presided over. From the gleaming silver of a cauldron, we turn to the haunting intimacy of a single human life. Lindoman, found in an English bog, forces us to confront the reality of ritual violence. This young man, who lived around 2,000 years ago, was killed in a meticulously staged sequence. He was struck on the head, garroted until his neck broke, and his throat was cut, the blood draining into the peat. His last meal was a griddle cake containing a trace of mistletoe pollen, a plant sacred to the Druids. The threefold method and the sacred plant suggest this was not a murder, but a sacrifice, perhaps an offering to the gods of the underworld during a time of crisis. He represents the most solemn and terrifying duty a Druid might have performed, the taking of a life to restore cosmic balance, a practice the Romans would later amplify into their propaganda of the Wicker Man. But their world was not only one of solemn sacrifice, it was also one of precise celestial order. The Coligny Calendar, a fragmented bronze plaque discovered in France, is a testament to this. It is a complex 5-year lunisolar calendar, marking months as either lucky or unlucky, and noting the great festivals like Beltane and Samhain. This was not a farmer's almanac, it was a sophisticated mathematical and religious document, likely used by the Druidic class to calculate the correct times for rituals, to track the motions of the moon and sun, and to maintain the sacred schedule of the tribe. It proves their role as astronomers was grounded in a precise technical system, a far cry from the image of wild soothsayers guessing at the clouds. Finally, we have the votive hoards, offerings cast into rivers and lakes. The Battersea shield, with its dazzling red enamel and bronze swirls, was never meant for battle. It is too thin and fragile. It was a ceremonial object offered to the spirit of the River Thames. The Waterloo helmet, a bronze crown with 2 sweeping horns, is another ritual piece, likely worn for ceremonies before being given to the water. These were not hidden treasures, they were deliberate gifts, communications with the divine realm that the Druids mediated. Each of these artifacts, from the grand cauldron to the humble helmet, forms a piece of the puzzle. They show a spiritual world that was rich, symbolic, ordered by the stars, and intimately connected to the landscape through sacrifice and offering. They give form to the invisible world the Druids served, a world where every action, from marking a calendar to depositing a shield, was part of a constant, sacred conversation. The intricate swirls on a bronze mirror were a silent sermon. To understand the world of the Druids, we must learn to read a language that was never written, the breathtaking visual code of Celtic art. This is known as the Latin style, named for an archaeological site in Switzerland where it was first clearly identified. Emerging around the 5th century before the Common Era, it spread across the Celtic world from France to Hungary and into Britain and Ireland. At first glance, it seems purely abstract, a mesmerizing dance of lines, but look closer and you see its foundations are in nature, twisted and transformed. The artists took the elegant curve of a vine, the unfurling frond of a fern, and the graceful arc of a bird's wing, then dissolved these organic forms into a fluid, hypnotic geometry. This was not mere decoration for beauty's sake. In a culture that revered the spoken word over the written one, visual art became a powerful vessel for meaning, a symbolic language expressing the deepest truths of their cosmology. The Druids, as the philosophers and keepers of sacred knowledge, would have been the interpreters and perhaps even the commissioners of this symbolic vocabulary. They understood that a symbol could hold a concept too vast for simple description. So what were these symbols saying? Let's decipher a few key motifs. Perhaps the most iconic is the triskel or triple spiral. 3 curved arms, often looking like bent human legs, radiate from a central point in a dynamic, rotating pattern. This is not a static image, it pulses with motion. Scholars believe it represented a multitude of sacred triple concepts, the 3 realms of land, sea, and sky, the cycle of life, death, and rebirth, or the past, present, and future. It is a perfect visual expression of the Celtic worldview, where everything exists in a state of eternal, interconnected turning, just like the wheel of the year. Then there is the simple spiral, a single line curling inward or outward. This could symbolize a journey, perhaps the soul's path into the other world or back from it. An outward spiral might represent growth, expansion, and the radiating sun. When you see these spirals linked in an endless, interlocking pattern, known as a trumpet spiral, you are looking at a map of eternity, a path with no beginning and no end, mirroring the belief in the soul's endless journey. The art is also populated with stylized animals, each a character in this visual myth. The boar is a symbol of ferocity, courage, and untamed strength, an attribute of warriors and gods. You find it emblazoned on helmets and shield bosses. Birds, especially ravens and swans, are messengers between the worlds, creatures of prophecy and transformation. Their elongated, graceful forms are woven into the metalwork, becoming one with the swirling foliage. This symbolic language was applied to the most precious objects. Look at a torque, that rigid neck ring of gold or bronze worn by the elite. Its terminals, the ends that meet at the throat, are often exquisitely decorated with Latin designs. Wearing such a torque was not just a display of wealth, it was a statement of identity, literally encircling the wearer with the sacred symbols of their people and their gods. The scabbard of a chieftain's sword was a canvas. Elaborate patterns were etched onto the metal, not to be seen in the chaos of battle, but to imbue the weapon with spiritual power and protection, a silent prayer in metal carried into the fray. Even the back of a bronze hand mirror, a personal object, would be covered in this sacred lacework, suggesting that the act of gazing at one's reflection was connected to deeper concepts of identity and the other self. This art style is hypnotic because it invites the eye on a journey, leading you along a curve that seems to have no end. There is no single focal point. Your gaze is meant to wander and get lost in the connections. This visual experience is itself a teaching. It mimics the interconnectedness of all life, the endless cycles of nature, and the labyrinthine path to wisdom. The Druids, who held the keys to this symbolic kingdom, could look at a decorated cauldron or a prince's torque and read a story of creation, a prayer for protection, or a map of the cosmos. Their philosophy was not locked in scrolls. It was forged in gold and etched in bronze, waiting for us to learn how to see. Even the most brilliant artifacts cannot answer every question. The deeper we go, the more we must confront the stubborn limits of our knowledge. The story of the Druids is not a puzzle we can neatly solve. It is a landscape dotted with tantalizing shadows, and some of the biggest questions have no clear answers. Perhaps the most fundamental debate is about the very structure of their order. Were the Druids a unified pan-Celtic priesthood, a kind of ancient international college with shared rules and a central authority? Or were they a collection of localized tribal wise men, similar in function but operating independently? The Roman accounts, particularly Caesar's, imply a surprising degree of organization. He writes that they held a great annual assembly in a central territory of Gaul, where disputes were settled and doctrines were debated. This suggests a network, a conscious effort to maintain consistency across tribes. Yet, archaeology offers a more fragmented picture. Ritual practices, while sharing common themes, show strong regional variations. The offerings in a French river might differ from those in a British bog. This could mean the core philosophy was consistent, a shared reverence for nature and the other world, but its expression was adapted to local gods, landscapes, and tribal customs. They may have been more like a guild of professionals who shared a common training and worldview, rather than a rigid, hierarchical church. This mystery forces us to wonder, did a Druid from Gaul truly understand the sacred rites of a Druid in Ireland? Or was their unity more a matter of reputation and shared purpose than of identical ritual? Then there is the ultimate, haunting question: what exactly was in the vast library of their minds that they chose never to write down? We know they memorized laws and genealogies and star lore, but these were the tools of their office. What was the secret wisdom itself? What were the core philosophical teachings, the creation myths, the precise nature of the gods, the detailed maps of the soul's journey that were considered too sacred for ink? Was it a coherent metaphysical system, a detailed understanding of the soul's mechanics and its relationship to the natural world? Or was it a collection of powerful, experiential truths gained through meditation, trance, and decades of observation, truths that simply could not be captured by words alone? The loss of this oral canon is perhaps the greatest cultural tragedy of the ancient Celtic world. It is a silence that echoes. This leads to our final speculation: what truly happened after the Roman suppression? When the public groves were cut down and the political power was broken, did the core teachings vanish forever? It is tempting to think so, that a tradition so dependent on oral transmission would die with its last masters. But knowledge has a stubborn way of seeping into the cracks of culture. While the formal, organized Druidism of Gaul and Britain was dismantled, its fragments did not simply evaporate, they trickled down. They survived in the stubborn persistence of folk customs, the stories told by the hearth on a winter's night about fairies living in mounds. They lingered in the local reverence for a particular well or an ancient gnarled tree, now associated with a Christian saint. They hid in the rhythms of agricultural life and the old rhymes for predicting the weather. The deepest philosophical kernels, the ideas about the soul's immortality and the sacredness of nature, may have been too fundamental to erase entirely. They became part of the unspoken substrate of belief, influencing how people saw their world long after the name Druid was forgotten, so the investigation continues. Every new archaeological find, every fresh look at an old text, is another attempt to listen to that silence. The history of the Druids reminds us that some stories are not meant to have an ending. They are an invitation to keep looking, to keep questioning what we think we know about the past. Their story is a lesson in the fragility of memory and the power of a story untold. We began with shadows in an oak grove, guided by the hostile light of Roman texts, and followed whispers from the earth, from ritual shafts and votive treasures in dark waters. We stood in the sacred Nemeton and witnessed the turning of the celestial wheel at Samhain and Beltane. We met the oak knowers as judges and astronomers, poets and healers, their authority etched not in stone but in the minds of their people. We saw that empire fall, its roots cut by Roman axes on the shores of Mona, and watched its essence transform, finding refuge in the scriptoria of Irish monks and later in the romantic longings of a modern age. The central truth of this entire journey is that the Druids remain hidden by design. They built their wisdom to be ephemeral, a living library of memory that would die with its last keeper. And the history that survived was penned by those who sought to erase them, a conqueror's portrait designed to justify their destruction. This double silence, one chosen and one imposed, is the heart of their enigma. Yet their legacy is undeniable. They endure as potent symbols of intellectual resistance against overwhelming force, of a profound, sacred connection to the natural world that our modern age desperately seeks to recapture, and of the immense, terrifying power that comes from being the sole keeper of a people's knowledge. In the end, the search for the Druids teaches us less about a specific people and more about the nature of history itself. It shows us how the past is not a fixed record, but a story constantly being rewritten by the victors, the poets, and the seekers who come after. It is made in the moment, lost in the violence of change, and rediscovered in the fragments we choose to value. Picture a single, ancient oak at dusk, its branches black against a fading sky. It has witnessed centuries come and go. It does not speak, yet it holds every story in its rings. The Druids are like that tree. We may never know the full truth of what passed beneath its boughs, but we feel the gravity of its presence, the pull of its deep-rooted mystery. In seeking them, we are ultimately learning how to listen to the silence and how to find meaning in the spaces between the words. What part of their hidden history resonates most with you? Share your thoughts below and subscribe to join us on the next journey into the forgotten corners of